Thank you for taking the time to listen to Ask Win. If you would like to stop this podcast at any time, you are welcome to it. But I would request that you come back to this podcast and look for my books on Amazon. Type in I Win, Hope in Life on Amazon or your favorite ebook provider or on Audible.
Welcome to Ask Win, and my quick programming announcement, and this is going to be a quick programming announcement, is this podcast is actually broadcast on a podcast feed that's used for national and international use. So for those of you that thought this podcast was just for me, it's not. It's actually for all of you. I do this because of all of you. Now, every single time out from Erica's interview on, I am going to say what I just said to you guys because that's the right way to do it, and that's how we're doing it more and more as I get trained in this field as a professional fashion journalist, which I can't believe I just said. I have to be professional about it, so I might as well tell you guys that this feed is public, but whatever Erica doesn't want to say can be edited out, but I need to tell you guys that this feed is public and goes every which way, and I talk about this feed. So enough of my programming announcement. Here I said it was going to be a short programming announcement, but I'm going to let Erica take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am Erica McAfee. I am a environmental manager. That's my day job. And I also host a podcast. So I like to say I'm a podcast host at night. Called the Sisters in Loss podcast, where I just talk about my journey with a pregnancy loss and how to share stories and testimonies of other women in their pregnancy loss or infertility journey. So that's what I do in my, I guess, night job, if you want to call it. So I'm excited to be on the podcast. I want to talk about my son who has cerebral palsy, and his name is Maxwell. Yes, his name is Maxwell.
We had a comment thread here. See, I don't know this before she told me that. Because, let me tell you something here. My mother, before she had me, had a miscarriage before she had me. So I haven't done any research whether a miscarriage leads to cerebral palsy or not, but I am interested in hearing your story and connecting the dots. And, of course, I'll do research before your episode comes out next Wednesday and see what I can find.
Awesome. And I'm not sure if there is a correlation between miscarriage and cerebral palsy, but I do know the way my son was born, without oxygen, this has to do with me having pregnancies back to back to back and not having the opportunity for my body to heal. So a little bit about my journey and how my son had been diagnosed. I had two losses. I had a full-term birth loss at 39 weeks, and then I also had a loss about 7 months later at around 18 weeks. So with my son, when I got pregnant with my son, it was probably about a year, maybe a year and a half from my first pregnancy. And I had two pregnancies right back to back. So my body really didn't have a chance to heal. So I went through the entire pregnancy with my son. I did have some complications. I had something that's called cervical incompetence. It's basically when your cervix starts to open as the baby gets bigger. So they actually had to do surgery on me while I was pregnant to kind of keep my cervix closed. So I had that done when I was almost halfway through my pregnancy, about 19, 20 weeks. And then the rest of this pregnancy was pretty much smooth sailing. I was still considered high risk because of the previous losses that I had. So I did have a lot of follow-ups with the doctors and things like that. And then one day, around 32 weeks pregnant, I was about 8 months pregnant, I started to feel different. I knew it wasn't labor pains. It was just different. And what ended up happening is my placenta, which, is the sac that the baby sits in. Well, the placenta is what is attached to the sac. And the placenta is what gives the baby all of their oxygen, their food, their nutrients, those things. That completely detached from my uterus itself. So that was what was happening. And so during that period of time, my baby boy had some oxygen loss, the unknown period of time of oxygen loss. They weren't really sure when my placenta completely detached, but it did detach, and that was the uneasiness that I was feeling at the time. So to give you an idea of how fast my son came, I arrived to the hospital about almost 2:00. My son was born at like 2:19. So that's how fast they reacted to the fact that they couldn't hear. They heard a very faint heartbeat, and they couldn't get any really good diagnostics on him. They knew that they had to immediately get him out of me. So they did an emergency C-section and was able to get him out and resuscitate him. And we knew once he was off of oxygen, we knew that he was going to have some neurological issues. We just didn't know the extent of them. As, the brain typically, sometimes it heals itself, especially at that young age, when he's just born. It wasn't until he was over a year old that we finally got the diagnosis that he had spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. And that only came because we ended up going to a more specialized physical therapist that said that, he needs a formal diagnosis so that they could do more specific care to what he needs. And he is the light of our world. He is a joy. I love being able to understand what it means to have a child that's nonverbal, that has a special need or disability, and be able to educate other people on exactly what it means and how to not treat him any differently, even though he's differently able.
Yes, exactly. Amen to that. Amen to that. Because you summed it up so eloquently as it's not even funny. But do you think you would be a different person if you had not had as many miscarriages as you have had?
Yeah, I think that the journey to having Maxwell has taught me to be more compassionate and to have more grace. And I think that I don't think that I would be appreciative of the fact that he's differently able if I hadn't lost 2 children prior. And I knew that I wanted a child so bad. I wanted to grow our family so much that when he came to us, it was just pure joy because he was still here. He wasn't sent back to heaven like my other babies. So I think I was more openly to accept the fact that that he was here, and I was just joyful that he was here. And I think that having him has given me more compassion for the community and people that look like him and may act like him or just may not be able to talk for themselves, and for us to always be an advocate for them. So it's only going to help him continue to grow and develop and thrive where he is, meeting him where he is,
Yeah, exactly. What inspired you to start your podcast?
Well, I started my podcast because I felt that there were a lot of podcasts out there that talk about the pregnancy journey, the birthing experience. But there wasn't many podcasts that were focused on people telling their lost stories and their miscarriage stories and their infertility journeys. And I wanted to provide a space for women to open up and share those stories and how they have healed, how they overcome, the resources that they use, and how do they get to a place of peace after their loss. And then also another part of it is being able to shed light on my story with my son, because a lot of people don't really talk about, disability or, people who are mentally able. So I wanted to make sure that I was an advocate, as I am an advocate for him, but I can show people through my actions, through my words, through the things that I do with my son, that he can go everywhere, anywhere with me to experience the same things that all kids experience. And I want to make sure that I continue to shed light on a topic that people don't typically talk about.
No, they don't. And I know, as a matter of fact, I know that I am the only woman podcaster out there with CP who's doing a podcast, because for the heck of it, I like to share other people's stories. And yet, at the same time, I think we need to share the stories of cerebral palsy and all the other physical disabilities, because people are doing research out the yin yang, but there's not enough awareness. So, okay, what has been your favorite episode that you have done?
Probably is the episode with me and my husband up there, mainly because we talk about our journey to Maxwell. The first episode of the podcast, I share my loss story, very similar to what I talked about today. I talk about my first loss, I talk about my second loss. But in the third episode of the podcast, my husband is up there, and my husband shares from his perspective our journey to Maxwell and the events that happened after Maxwell was born. I was, kind of out of commission during that time period, so I don't know a lot of the decisions that he made, a lot of the questions that came up during that period, the conversations he had with the doctors and the nurses, because he was there. He lived through it all. So that episode is probably my favorite, because I learned so much in that conversation with him about that journey that we had not really talked about before. My other favorite episode is the most recent episode I did. It's episode 41. And that is with Patrice Washington, America's Money Maven, and she's a personal finance coach, and she shares her story. And that's my favorite episode, because she talks about surrendering no matter the outcome in the process. And I really, really enjoyed that episode.
That being said, it's not easy financially to take care of a disabled child. I know this from personal experience. So I would just say go listen to Alice's podcast. So what would be your best advice for moms that are scared to tell their stories, whether they had miracle kids because of a miscarriage, or they're pregnant and they're scared of a miscarriage?
I would tell them to take all the time that they need to get to a place of healing where they're able to talk about it. Sometimes it just takes time to go through those 5 stages of grief so that you can be able to share your story and share, your journey to get into that place. And just give yourself grace.
If you don't mind me asking, how does extreme miscarriages affect your uterus?
Oh, well, a part of my story that I didn't share is that I'm unable to have any more children. So I would have to have a surrogate or adopt.
Yeah, adopt. Yeah, well, if people ask me, as a woman with cerebral palsy all the time, they go, can you get pregnant? Can you be a mom? And my response is yes, but I don't think my body could handle it. So, Erica, as we close out this interview, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, so I would love your advice from an adult perspective. Since I'm a mom and my son is younger, give me the perspective of an adult on what I should expect as my son gets bigger and grows and gets older and things like that.
Here's the nutshell version, and then we can talk about the small line. Well, as I said, all bodies go through natural puberty like anyone else would. So be ready for that. Be ready for that when people are amazed that I went through puberty like anyone else would. And people ask me all the time, are you internal organs impacted? And then I say, nope, they're not. Nope, they're not. They're just impacted in a different way. So be ready for that. And also, you told me that your son is going to school now. Also, be ready for when he gets older. And I'm sorry to put it this way, but people like to stare at people with cerebral palsy, especially young kids. I don't get that one. I don't get that one. So be ready for the talking behind Maxwell's back. Be ready to hear that. Yeah. And I'm sorry to make you sad, but
no, you make me sad. You're just being honest. No, you're being honest. I asked you for your opinion.
I'm just being honest. And I don't know how much feeling you get now, but when I don't know what device Maxwell uses, I presume a wheelchair.
He's wheelchair bound. Yep.
He's wheelchair bound. So I'm walkbound. I was walking independently up until 2006 unaided. I had a horrible scoliosis surgery go horribly wrong on me. Be prepared for the scoliosis aspects of CP2, which that's not good. What doctors don't tell you is just start looking out for that when Maxwell turns 16 and 17.
Thank you for the advice and the encouragement.
Well,
I definitely appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And you guys, I'm going to keep up with Erica here because I think her story is amazing. And as I said, I didn't even know she had a child with cerebral palsy. She's going to have to send me pictures of that cute kid offline because I'm good. Good. We all end up being cute kids with cerebral palsy, and that's what makes cerebral palsy just a little bit easier. My advice to you guys is, one, go listen to Erica's podcast. Two, just be open and honest about all bodies. Three, just accept people for who they are. And this, I know I heard Maxwell in background, so this advice goes for him. Just when he gets older, just be open and honest with him that he does have cerebral palsy, so he knows about it. And I do have a couple updates on my books, but I'll save that until next week because I know Erica has got to go hug Maxwell for me and give him a big hug. And Erica, you're doing a wonderful job. I know that. And you're doing a wonderful job as a mom, as a spokesperson for people with cerebral palsy, and as a spokesperson for women with miscarriages. And Erica, where can people find you, and where can people find your podcast?
I am most active on Instagram, so they can follow me at Erica M. McAfee, like the antivirus, MCAFEE, on Instagram, at Twitter, as well on Facebook. And my podcast is everywhere. You normally would listen to podcasts.
Please go listen to Erica's podcast. And this podcast will be out on Wednesdays. And you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye, you guys.
Please leave a review on Amazon for my books, and please share this episode with a friend who needs it.